No cameras were allowed inside. No photographs survived the worst rooms. But in the frozen silence of Siberia, millions disappeared into a system designed not only to imprison, but to break. They called it correction. They called it labor. But behind barbed wire and endless snow, the Soviet Gulag perfected methods of psychological and physical torment so calculated that survival itself became an act of rebellion. Tonight, we examine 7 torture methods of the Soviet Gulag, methods far worse than most history books admit. To understand the brutality, we must first understand the machine. After the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, the new Soviet state under Vladimir Lenin began using forced labor camps to isolate political enemies. What began as a tool for consolidating power would evolve into one of the largest systems of repression in modern history. Under Joseph Stalin, particularly during the 1930s Great Purge, the camp system expanded dramatically. Administered by the secret police, known first as the Cheka, later the NKVD, the Gulag became an economic engine powered by fear. By the late 1930s, millions were imprisoned: political dissidents, engineers, farmers resisting collectivization, writers, army officers, even loyal party members caught in waves of paranoia. The Gulag was not an accident of cruelty, it was policy. The system stretched across Siberia, the Arctic Circle, Kazakhstan, and beyond. Camps built railways, mined gold, harvested timber, and carved canals through frozen earth. The prisoners were expendable labor. Survival rates were secondary to output quotas. But forced labor alone does not explain the system's terror. The Gulag relied on torture not only to punish, but to extract confessions, enforce obedience, and psychologically dismantle human identity. What follows are 7 methods that reveal how deeply calculated this system truly was. Before prisoners ever saw a labor camp, many endured interrogations. Inside NKVD prisons, detainees were subjected to what was called the conveyor method. Interrogators worked in shifts. The prisoner did not. They were denied sleep for days, sometimes over a week. Bright lights burned constantly. Guards prevented collapse by forcing them to stand. Sleep deprivation was not random brutality. It was precision. After 72 hours without sleep, cognitive collapse begins. Hallucinations, confusion, paranoia. The boundary between truth and suggestion dissolves. Exhausted prisoners signed fabricated confessions, often implicating friends, family, colleagues. The confession justified the arrest justified the quota justified the purge. This was psychological warfare disguised as investigation, and it worked. Officially, torture was illegal. Unofficially, it was standard. Interrogators used what they called physical pressure. Beatings with rubber truncheons, kicks to the kidneys, blows designed to avoid visible bruising. Prisoners were sometimes forced to stand facing a wall for hours while being struck from behind. The goal was not merely pain, it was submission. In 1937-38, during the height of the Great Purge, confession rates skyrocketed. Not because guilt increased, but because resistance collapsed. Many confessed to espionage plots that never existed, to sabotage they never committed. The system did not require truth, it required compliance. And pain made compliance efficient. Once inside the Gulag camps, torture became bureaucratic. Food was tied directly to labor quotas. Failed to meet your assigned workload, your rations were cut. A typical ration might include watery soup and a few hundred grams of bread. For prisoners performing heavy labor in sub-zero temperatures. This was physiologically catastrophic. Malnutrition weakened muscles, impaired immune systems, clouded cognition. Hunger became a weapon of control. Prisoners were forced into an impossible equation. Work harder while starving, or starve faster for failing to work. It was not chaotic cruelty. It was structured degradation. Over time, prisoners entered what survivors called dokodyaga, a state of walking death, emaciated, detached, beyond hope. The system did not need execution chambers when exhaustion and hunger performed the task more quietly. Many camps were located in Siberia or above the Arctic Circle. Winter temperatures could plunge below 40 degrees Celsius. Prisoners lacked adequate clothing. Boots split. Gloves were rare. Frostbite was common. Labor did not stop for weather. Mining gold in Kolyma, logging forests in the taiga, digging canals through frozen ground. Cold was constant. Frostbite led to gangrene. Amputations were primitive or non-existent. Weak prisoners collapsed in snowdrifts and froze within minutes. But the cold also served a psychological function. In extreme cold, thinking narrows to survival. Complex resistance disappears. The body's energy is consumed simply staying alive. Nature itself became an accomplice. The karcер, the punishment cell, was among the most feared internal disciplines. These cells were unheated, cramped, and often dark. Prisoners were placed inside for minor infractions, talking, resting too long, failing quotas. They received reduced rations, sometimes bread and water only. In winter, walls accumulated frost inside the cell. The purpose was isolation. Deprived of warmth, light, and social contact, the prisoner experienced accelerated psychological breakdown. Humans are social organisms. Remove connection, and identity begins to erode. The karcer was not only physical confinement, it was sensory deprivation. Some emerged disoriented, some emerged compliant, some did not emerge at all. One of the Gulag's most insidious methods was indirect torture. Camp authorities intentionally empowered hardened criminals, known as blatnie, over political prisoners. Criminal gangs controlled barracks, food distribution, even violence. Guards often looked away. By structuring an internal hierarchy, authorities outsourced brutality. Political prisoners were beaten, robbed, and terrorized by fellow inmates. This fractured solidarity. Divide the prisoners, and control becomes effortless. It was social engineering as repression. The state did not need to enforce every punishment. It cultivated a culture where prisoners policed and preyed upon each other. The result was not just fear of guards, but fear of everyone. Trust collapsed. Perhaps the most enduring torture was the slow erasure of identity. Prisoners were reduced to numbers, letters censored, names replaced by camp designations. Many did not know their sentence length. 10 years could become 20 without explanation. The uncertainty was deliberate. Without a defined endpoint, hope becomes abstract. Time loses structure, memory fades, future dissolves. Totalitarian power seeks more than obedience. It seeks internal surrender. The Gulag aimed to create a human being who expected nothing, who imagined nothing beyond the barbed wire horizon. This was not only a prison system, it was a laboratory in dismantling the individual. In 1953, Joseph Stalin died. Almost immediately, cracks formed. Mass uprisings erupted in camps like Norilsk and Vorkuta. Prisoners demanded reform. Some guards hesitated. The fear mechanism weakened. Under Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet state began limited de-Stalinization. Millions were eventually released or rehabilitated. But the damage was irreversible. Families had vanished. Intellectual classes decimated. Entire regions scarred by silent graves. The Gulag did not simply imprison individuals. It reshaped Soviet society through trauma. The legacy of the Gulag extended beyond barbed wire. Fear altered behavior for generations. Citizens learned that words could be fatal. Silence became survival. Even after reforms, the memory of the camps lingered in literature and testimony, most famously documented by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose accounts exposed the system to the world. The Gulag demonstrated how bureaucracy can normalize cruelty, how ideology can rationalize suffering, how ordinary officials can administer extraordinary brutality, one form, one quota, one signature at a time. The machinery did not require monsters, it required obedience. The Soviet Gulag was not built overnight, it grew step by step, policy by policy, justified as necessary, temporary, efficient. History often asks how such systems begin, but the more unsettling question is how they continue. How many small compromises does it take before suffering becomes routine? How many signatures before conscience falls silent? The Gulag reminds us that power, when unchecked, does not merely control bodies. It studies them, calculates them, redesigns them, and in doing so it reveals something enduring about human nature. The capacity for cruelty is vast, but so is the capacity to endure it. The question history leaves us with is simple. Which one will shape the future?